Welcome to the Performance Collective, where I bring together experts across the running, fitness, and human performance space to share insights, experiences, and practical strategies for improving performance. Hosted by me, Hannah Witt, a USCA certified running coach and athlete success and operations manager, this podcast features conversations with elite athletes, coaches, nutritionists, chiropractors, race directors, and industry leaders. Whether you're chasing a personal best, returning from injury, or looking to better understand the science behind training and recovery, the Performance Collective offers actionable insights to help you train smarter and perform at your best. Today on the Performance Collective, we're joined by James Fleming to talk about everything running nutrition related.
We're so excited to have you. And just a little bit for our listeners about your background. You are a nutritionist and you support runners of all abilities, mainly, but I'm guessing not exclusively, through your Fuel the Runner platform. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose that Fuel the Runner started through my own running journey a few years ago. So I was fortunate to get a place in the London Marathon back in 2019, 2020. And then COVID unfortunately hit. So that delayed me getting to do it. But I'm pleased I managed to do it a few years later. And it was only through my own sort of running journey that I came across lots of runners in a similar position where I saw people posting, sharing. I joined various forums and people were saying, "Oh, I'm running 20 miles this week, 15 miles. I'm doing sort of long runs," but everyone was struggling with injury, illness, and there was also a lot of misinformation shared, particularly around the nutrition side of things. So that led me to create my own sort of platform, which, as you said, is called Fuel the Runner. So it's a sort of education-based support platform designed to help runners of all levels and abilities to enhance their performance using the power of food and nutrition. So making sure they're fueling themselves actually effectively before runs, same thing during runs, and then equally optimizing their sort of post-exercise nutrition to support recovery too. But then equally for me, it's not just the running side of things, it's also the nutrition side of things outside of running. So the impact that nutrition has in terms of overall health and well-being as well. So support around things like navigating the food shopping, for example. So being aware of some of the tricks that supermarkets use, how nutrition can help individuals maintain things like good heart health, for example, how they can maintain a strong immune system. So help reduce the days lost due to illness, I find is a big one, particularly at the moment, where we're going through sort of the winter training at the moment too.
Yeah, exactly. So just to tighten up that timeline a little bit, give us more understanding. You did London 2019, and when did you launch Fuel the Runner? Was that very soon after, or what was that timeline like?
Yeah, so Fuel the Runner's been going about 3 years now. So it's been a little sort of side project that I've been sort of building and growing over the past sort of few years, just trying to help support as many runners as possible now. So it's growing into quite a nice little community. Hopefully it is making a difference. Hopefully the runners that have seen the content have engaged with me in terms of support and things like that over the years. Hopefully they have found it a sort of use. Hopefully they've seen some improvements in their running performance, their other training goals that they're working towards as well. So yeah, it's been going now for about 3 or 4 years ish, thereabouts.
Well, it's exciting, both for you as a runner and as an entrepreneur, to see all that kind of coalesce into something that you can pursue both on your own as an athlete, but also professionally. So have you found that merging, I guess, the interests with the professional side and basically starting your own business, has the professional aspect detracted from your hobby interest in your own athletic pursuits? I know that sometimes when we have an interest that we're so excited about, and then we're like, oh, I want to do this to make a living, sometimes, the love for it can almost take a back seat. Have you found that at all?
I think I've definitely had gone through stages with it where you sort of go, oh right, I've got to do this today, that today. Sometimes I've had to sacrifice some runs because I've then got some deadlines to hit, do some other bits as well. So sometimes I do have a bit of a frustrating time or go through a bit of a rough patch with it. But no, I think it's something that I enjoy. It's something that, yeah, for me, I suppose I've just found like a really important area that just is overlooked. I mean, for me, I've often said that nutrition is just 1% of an athlete's development, an individual's development, but it's that 1% that just has such a big impact on the other 99%. So if I can sort of help the runners, educate them on sort of how to navigate those scenarios themselves, give them the tools, the knowledge, the confidence in those situations, then hopefully it's going to make a huge difference. Rather than when people say to me, can I write them a 6-week meal plan? I don't particularly enjoy that side of things. And two, I often find it's a waste of my time and their time, because all it takes is something to happen. The most common excuse for runners is they're tired. So that meal that I've then spent a little bit of time putting together for them and creating, that whole meal plan goes out the window. Whereas if I can give them the tools, the knowledge to be able to do that themselves, it's going to have a much longer or much greater long lasting impact, hopefully.
It's like, what, give them a fish versus teaching them how to fish? Is that what the saying is?
Yeah, I think so. So
Yeah,
something along those lines.
that's interesting though, that I can see that being frustrating, and trying to figure out macros and nutrients and everything for a meal, and spending the time and the research and resources on your part, and then life happens, and maybe that meal doesn't happen because of time restrictions like you mentioned. And for a 6-week plan, that's a lot of time to put into meal planning for somebody. And I think for a lot of us, when we have kind of one day that doesn't go great, it almost is like a snowballing effect for more. And maybe for the first two weeks, 3 weeks, everything's going great, and then something slides, and then everything kind of goes where in a handbasket. So that, I can see that being challenging, but I do appreciate that you understand humanity and have given us almost a tool to help ourselves by educating. So with the education that you provide, I guess, I, working with athletes of all levels, sometimes, we'll work with an athlete who's starting their first 5K to train for that. And sometimes we're working with very seasoned athletes who have been running for decades. And so there is such a dichotomy, I guess, in the level of knowledge between those two groups. Have you found that also with your line of work?
Yeah, 100% for me. Even at the sort of top level, when I've spoken to sort of elite athletes, they've had actually no help or guidance themselves. A lot of it has come through, I suppose, trial and error and finding what works for them. But even certain individuals I've spoken to, for me, there was a lot of areas that I was then able to identify where it's like, oh, okay, if we can make some tweaks and changes here, we could go for a much faster pace. We could hit maybe a sub 3 at the London Marathon, for example, or Manchester Marathon. Again, what I've often found over the years is there's a lot of misinformation. Equally, a lot of information that's often shared is very much anecdotal, as in, I did this, therefore it's going to work for the people around me. But as I'm sure we've all seen, it's definitely not the case. So I'd probably say on average, probably over 50% of the runners I speak to and have worked with, I'd probably say their nutrition knowledge, it's not say it's not there at all, their understanding of it, but I've certainly found a lot of room for improvement with a majority of those runners, and that's across all levels, right from those, like you say, just starting out, to those that are more seasoned, more experienced runners too.
So you would say that doesn't matter the level, questions are still pretty similar, or the rooms for, I guess, the items that people can improve upon are similar, even though the levels are different? Or do you find that elite athletes struggle with certain problems a little bit more so than, runners who perhaps aren't elite, maybe just joggers or starting out?
Yeah, I've certainly spoken to a lot of some of the elite athletes where, even for the amount of volume or the volume of training that they're doing on a sort of regular basis, they're still massively underfueling. They're not recovering. So I'd probably say, like, if I like an analogy, and the best analogy I often use for a lot of well, anyone, is if you imagine we had like a battery above our head, I'd probably look at even those elite runners. And from a nutrition point of view, their battery would probably still be quite low because they're often overlooking the recovery nutrition. They're not fueling themselves, not drinking enough. Same thing with those just starting out. Some runners I speak to, they do go for this point of trying to go for what is considered like the best products. They will go for sort of certain brands of gels over others, for example. But in terms of sort of, it comes back to my point around sort of people sharing what they did. Someone else then tries it, but it doesn't necessarily work. I spoke to a runner about a year ago, who just got into running, and he was telling me about he'd done some research online about guidelines, recommendations, and then he'd sort of got the figure. So around 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour is a rough guideline for a majority of runners to aim for, but guidelines, I'm sure we'll come on to this, can be a bit higher. He'd done some research, and then he'd looked up sort of best gels, and it came up with some of your more advanced formulas, so like the Morton gels. And then he'd sort of done a bit more research saying, yeah, should be having 3 gels an hour. So he sort of put 2 and 2 together, but probably made about 10, because he was then essentially having 120 grams of carbohydrate per hour with no training beforehand. So he said to me, thankfully he was running in the forest with no one around him, because he then had to go find a sort of quiet spot to you can probably guess where that went. So,
Yeah. That,
um,
yeah, I can see that being something that somebody who, they want to do the best they can when they start out and have a really strong, solid start. And, more is better, especially in this age where almost like super carb loading has become so popular. But, we spoke with Bob Siebehar, he's a nutritionist, optimization expert for metabolic efficiency over here in the States. And he was explaining too about that kind of misconception, how that super carbing isn't always an effective strategy for everybody. So I like that story though. And I'm glad that he had the woods around him to help him.
yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I could almost, maybe I should do that. I could do probably like a video. We can go through sort of common nutrition mistakes that a lot of runners make, and maybe that's a conversation for another podcast. But same thing with the carb loading. It's something that I often find a lot of people, they get the wrong idea where they think they've just got to consume as much carbohydrate as they possibly can the night before their race. But so usually from people I've worked with or spoken to, they just try and eat as much pasta as they physically can until they feel very sick. And then they just wake up the next day feeling terrible. They're very bloated, they're very heavy, and they don't necessarily run the best race. So, like you say, some of these sort of key strategies can be useful. The trouble is, a lot of, not just runners, a lot of athletes I work with, they don't necessarily know how to execute these strategies effectively, and that's again part of the reason why I created Fuel the Runner, to try and help runners by providing the evidence, the guidelines, how to apply it to their running in this easy to understand or easy to apply format, as well.
Yeah. Let's talk really practically for working adult runner who they've got to be at work or 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. They're getting up, I don't know, maybe 5 o'clock in the morning to get a running session in. They are on the road for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to try and get to work on time. And then they've got a lunch hour where maybe they could possibly do some mobility. Maybe after work, they want to do a strength training session, trying to get that 8-hour window between a run session and a strength training session in, and they try to do that after work. And they're getting home after strength training, and it's 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, and then they have to get up and try and, not the exact same thing, but something similar the next day. There are so many different barriers there to try and be your optimal self, because getting up early, I have a very hard time trying to make myself eat that early in the morning. And even though we don't practice fasted running, or we don't preach fasted running, like for me, it is almost like I can't hardly, I'll drink some water and I'll get on with the day. And it's not ideal, but how would you help somebody who is having that kind of schedule optimize their nutrition? Where would they put what kind of nutrients where?
Yeah, sure. So, for me, based on that example, really fueling is almost going to start the night before to an extent. So they're training early, like you say. I mean, when we look at the sort of the science, the guidelines will tell us having a high carb meal 3 hours before. That means, let's say the runner is running at 6 a.m. For them to get up at 3 a.m. in the morning, that's just not practical. It's not gonna happen. So for me here, I'd be trying to get them to have a high carb meal. So it could be jacket potatoes, could be pasta bolognese, for example, things like that. Having it the night before, the body's going to break it down, store that glycogen within the muscle. And
That's
so,
Sorry, I want to get it. So the night before, what time would you say optimally to have that dinner? Because some people have a lot of trouble like sleeping well with heavy dinner like that. So what time frame would you say for dinner the night before?
yeah, sure. I mean, for me, a lot of this is going to come down to sort of trial and error,
Mhm.
and finding what works for the runner. I always think it sounds a bit unprofessional, but in the sports nutrition world, we have what we call, or what we often refer to as the three T's of nutrition. You have your type, so what you're going to eat. So are you going to have some carbohydrate, protein? Are you going to have fruit and vegetables, things like that? And it's looking at sort of when or which one to have in that given situation. The second T is then the total, the portions, how much you're then having. And then the third T is then the timing. So, like you say, looking at an effective timing strategy. So, for me, I'd maybe start off having that as like a sort of normal dinner time. So, if they eat at, let's say, 7 o'clock, go to bed at 10 p.m., if that's what they're used to, I wouldn't expect there to be sort of too much of an issue there. If there's someone that eats a lot later, so let's say they eat at sort of 9, 10 o'clock and then try to go to bed half an hour later. So in that case, yeah, I wouldn't be having a sort of really heavy meal. I'd still be having something that's just going to sort of tie them over, support that sort of recovery option there. Um, in terms of sort of the night before that run, so yeah, maybe sort of 2, 3 hours before bed, just so they've got the time to digest the meal. When they then wake up, it's in a case of as soon as they wake up, it might be that they've got a snack on the side ready to go. It could be something quick, easy, high in carbohydrate, really low in fat and fiber, just to help reduce that risk of runner's gut. So it could be that they might have a cereal bar. It might be that they have a smoothie. It might be that they have a banana, some fruit. It could be that they have some sports drink. Maybe if it's a sort of shorter, lighter session, you're not necessarily gonna need sort of loads of fuel or loads of carbohydrate in this situation. It could be that they then have a gel. I've done that before myself. If I've got to do an early morning run, sometimes having a gel is the quickest, easiest way to just get some fuel, just get some energy into your body, just to give you a little bit of fuel, just to try and get through that sort of morning session. Once they then finish the morning session, for me, I think this is where preparation and organization comes in, and that becomes really important here. So, having some kit bag or sort of gym bag essentials, some work bag essentials could be things like, again, the cereal bars. It could be things like some fruit. It might be that they make up some wraps and bagels with some form of protein, some salad to go with it, just to give them some additional vitamins and minerals to further support that recovery process. Depending on them, what they're doing. So maybe, like you say, if they're doing some movement at lunchtime. In this example, if they're doing, like I say, some stretching, some mobility work, fuel in here is not really going to be required, just because the energy expenditure, if you like, is going to be a lot lower. If after work they're gonna run from work to the gym, do a strength session, same thing here. If they've got the option or the ability to, it might be sort of 2, 3 hours before they leave work, or maybe sort of 2 o'clock at 2 hours. So if they, let's say they leave work at 5, half 5, maybe around 3 o'clock, I try and have a sort of high carb meal, or some high carb snacks, just to give them some top that energy store up, or top that fuel source up, ready to help them get the most out of their run and in the gym session. Obviously, with days like this, it's a lot to do. You've got work commitments, family commitments, a lot of other things. So for me, it's also trying to make the nutrition really quick and easy. So a couple of bits I'd then add to this. One of my favorite or top recommendations for runners is things like batch cooking. So cooking loads of meals all in one go, and it just means that if it saves time, if they've got a meal that they've made for themselves already, when they get home, they've just got to heat it up rather than cooking something from scratch completely. My other recommendation here that seems to be quite popular is then things like stir fries. So when they get home, they're tired. A stir fry, this is my go-to one. It's just really quick, it's easy. You can chuck in, usually there's loads of random ingredients, probably got some chicken in the fridge, and then some different vegetables that need using up. Again, depending on sort of what the demands of my day have looked like, I might add a portion of carbohydrate to it. So it might be some rice, maybe some pasta. But then if I've had a maybe not as active day, maybe depending on sort of what I'm trying to do at that point in my training, I might just stick with the sort of stir fry itself, not necessarily have huge amounts of the carbohydrate, and just try and bulk it out with loads of vegetables just to still support that recovery, but equally sort of maintaining that satiety, supporting that muscle growth and repair afterwards as well.
Great. I love that you laid it out very specifically. I would say that when I haven't worked remotely and have had to physically go to a job, my struggle has been with trying to get a protein that I'm not sick of and that doesn't smell like tuna, because it's usually tuna, and
Yeah.
coworkers are not fans of that. But it's either, I feel like, peanut butter, tuna, or maybe if I'm feeling inspired, hard-boiled eggs and maybe hummus or something. And for
Mm.
that, you've got to refrigerate. So it becomes like putting all your stuff in the office cooler and things like that, or taking some kind of cold pack with you to store in your lunch bag. And, it sounds like a lot. And for somebody who's just starting out, meal prep can be overwhelming, and you almost feel like you're spending your whole Sunday cooking and preparing so that your week goes smoothly. Do you have, for people like me who aren't very creative with protein, do you have any other kind of options to add to maybe your basic, like tuna or your hummus or peanut butter, hard boiled eggs?
Yeah. For me, I've always tried to the recommendations I give, I always try and do it through more of a sort of food first approach, rather than necessarily supplements. I mean, just to cover supplements, probably the obvious one here is things like protein powders, protein shakes. Yes, they can be useful. They do have a time. For me, I believe in most cases, or 95% of cases, runners can get all the nutrients they need through their diet rather than resorting to supplements. But in some cases, having a bag of protein powder in your desk, for example, if it works, if it's the thing that's going to be the difference between you getting enough protein into your diet compared to you not, because maybe that runner's not had a chance to go food shopping or do the preparation, then for me it's a no-brainer. In terms of different options, for me, I'm quite a fan of things like essentially making it yourself. So I think my go-to again is things like energy balls, so things like using oats, honey, peanut butter, just to give it a little bit of protein there as well, for example. Depending on the situation that they're in, protein bars, protein bars themselves, I'm trying to sort of steer or use sort of less. But again, if depending on the situation that runner's in, like you say, if they've got limited food storage options, sometimes these are the best options to use in that situation, in that scenario. Um, if they have got access to sort of fridges, coolers at their sort of place of work, place of business, that then opens us up to lots of other options. So that could be things like milk. I mean, for me, that's again a common recommendation I often suggest to runners, just because in a pint of milk, for example, you've got about 20 grams of protein, and you've got about 40-50 grams of carbohydrate. It will vary sort of brand to brand a little bit. And then you've got the other important consideration here is it's then got a really good source of calcium to support that bone health, maintain lots of other functions within the body too. And of course, it's then helping you to rehydrate as well. In terms of other protein options, in terms of other protein options, again, things like using again, if you've got the ability to store them, using things like little blocks of cheese, for example. So in the UK, we have like the Baby Bell cheeses. Again, 2-3 of those, you've got a decent hit of protein there, for example. Using things like even using things like some of your sort of nuts pulses, so some unsalted nuts, for example, fairly good source of protein. Equally, you've got some healthy fats that are also coming from them as well. So they tend to be the ones that I start off with as my sort of minimum or my sort of basic starting point, and then I suppose it comes back to that point of sort of working with the runner to identify what's going to be possible for them in that situation. So let's say if they've got then access to more food storage facilities, or I think that's a really important point that you mentioned about sometimes taking a cool box to work with you, or taking like a chill box. Again, sometimes I think people feel a bit stupid, but again, if that's the thing that's going to support your training goals, if that's what's going to help you to hit these targets, for me, so be it. Yes, it might cost you a bit of it might cost you some money, it might be a sort of small or maybe slightly bigger investment. But again, I suppose for me, I've always said to people, the fuel you put into your body is going to have a huge impact on the performance that you get out of it. So having that plan, having that organization, for me, it's a real essential for every runner.
I love that. Yeah. What you maybe lack for your cool points, it's like what's going to help you long term. So you take your cooler with you to work. Yeah. I guess follow-up questions, and perhaps for this, maybe eliminate the kind of hassled runner on the go who doesn't have a lot of time. And just from a scientific standpoint, in terms of optimal nutrition, if we were to look at from that conversation what you just said, I thought of three things: protein powder, milk, and fats. So for my first question, I would ask for protein powder. If I think about it's being scientifically engineered, right? And so it's not got what nature has deemed optimal ratios for chief absorption as you would find in a natural food source of protein. It's what scientists have, they've come up with their assumptions of, and they're scientifically backed, of course, the highest quality protein that your body needs. But, does that process, that manufacturing process for the protein powder, does that detract from optimal absorption because it's lacking in whatever might else be in your meat or other kind of natural protein source? Is it in isolation comparable to that natural food source of protein? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. For me, I think protein powders, they do what they say on the tin. It's a source of just protein. Like you say, it's manufactured, it's made. Some brands are sort of better than others in terms of sort of quality. What else could be added in? I mean, the supplements industry in itself is again, probably a whole another conversation for another podcast, just because there are potentially lots of risks. But I think a lot of when we start talking about recovery, and again, it's all athletes of all levels, we immediately just focus on the protein, which, yes, protein powders are going to provide and help with, but it's also the importance of some of these other key essentials, other key nutrients. So in sports nutrition, again, we have what is often referred to as the 3Rs. Or 3R framework. So the first R is the rebuild, which is the importance of protein to help with the muscle growth and repair. The second R is the rehydrate, so replacing that fluid that's then been lost. And then the third R, which again is often overlooked, or a lot of people don't realise is important, is actually refueling yourself with the carbohydrates. So again, going back to my battery analogy, you've got, in the case of runners, some of these runners that are going out and doing, let's say 10, 15 miles, for example, they're running for 2-3 hours at a time. Their battery level is going to be so depleted by this point. Yes, having some protein is going to help sort of restore that battery level, but only to an extent. We're going to be able to restore it to a much greater extent if we can then include these other two R's with your, as I say, a source of protein making sure we're drinking plenty of fluid there. So if I've got the choice of like a protein shake, and then maybe a cereal bar, a banana, and a glass of milk, the sort of meal as such, or those little snacks, that's actually hitting all three of the three R's that we're sort of talking about there. Whereas, as I say, with the protein powder, really it's just a source of protein. I mean, yes, if you're adding milk to it, you would get some carbohydrate, and obviously mixing it in with the water, yes, it is rehydrating. But something like the cereal bar, the banana, the milk, that's fairly much cheaper as well in compared to, say, protein powders, protein, even like the protein drinks as well. So I mean, a pint of milk, for example, is what, 70-80p, something like that. Whereas some of these protein shakes, when you work it out on a per scoop basis, you're looking £1, maybe £2 and beyond per scoop there as well. So equally, from a cost point of view, that's what I'd be trying to focus on as well.
If someone was to go purchase protein powder, buy it online, and they were looking at the ingredients, are there any ingredients that you say definitely stay away from those particular ingredients when you're purchasing protein powder? Anything that comes to mind? Or maybe any suffixes on really long words that scream filler, or something else that's potentially dangerous?
Yeah, no, a really good question. I mean, for me, I suppose whenever I look at any form of food packaging, it's almost looking at the ingredients list and going, do you actually recognize the names of those ingredients? Can you actually pronounce them? If you don't recognize them, you can't pronounce them. There's a good chance that it's going to be something that is very processed, something that's maybe been added to improve the flavor, preserve shelf life. It could be, and this isn't just protein powders, but sort of food in general. It could be that it's been added as like a cheap substitute. So it's just a really sort of cost-effective way for these companies to reduce their cost of manufacturing, but then at the same time charge an absolute fortune for these products as well. Um, I suppose the other thing, just on the point of like safe supplement use, the supplements industry is worth billions now. Yet, in terms of the regulation isn't necessarily great. I mean, more for the elite athletes that start progressing, they might be subject to sort of anti-doping testing, for example. So in which case, it's really important that you look for products that have been Informed Sport tested or Informed Sport approved. It's just basically no supplement is 100% risk-free, but it's just a process that all batches of these products will have gone through just to check for any banned substances, just check they're not in there. For me, in terms of like the risk with some of the other factors, again, I'd always be trying to choose reputable sports companies, sports brands. There's lots that I do recommend. Equally, when you sort of buy some of these products in your like supplements shop on the high street, for example, a lot of the time it's not had any form of check or any form of test done or anything like that. So quite often, again, more for the elite athletes that then get tested. If you go onto like the UK anti-doping website, for example, quite often you can read stories about athletes are banned, and quite often it's because they've taken a supplement they don't realise then has a banned substance in. So for them, it's them that it's them. It's sorry, they're the ones that suffer. As a result, they're not allowed to train and compete. Um, Again, some of these brands, like you say, they could be all sorts of other substances, other things added to them that aren't necessarily on the packaging. So, like I say, for me, it's also choosing sort of safe companies as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just a really weird story from me. When I was in college, I was distance runner, and I remember coming home and I had some kind of injury in my lower leg that just wouldn't resolve. And I went to a chiropractor, and he started like palpating my abdomen, and he was like, "Oh, your adrenal glands, they're like overtaxed." And he gave me this like these pills that were like cow adrenal glands encapsulated in these pills. It was the most bizarre thing. And I, to this day, am like very, very unsure of the effectiveness of ingesting the adrenal glands that have been almost mashed up in a pill form. Have you ever heard of anything like that? for people who I guess are in, I don't know what you would call that, adrenal gland overload, perhaps, something like that?
Um, I must admit, I haven't. I'm really intrigued. I'm really
You
intrigued to
should
do
Google it.
some.
I'm going to have to Google it because you talking about this has brought that up.
Oh, 100%. I mean, yeah. After this podcast, after our conversation, I'm going to go away and do some research on that. I mean, I suppose it's a good example of the supplements market. Like I say, it's worth in the billions. There's new products coming out every single day. Yeah, for me, I'd probably say there's less than 10 supplements that actually have good strong sort of scientific evidence to back up their sort of claims. So when I see a lot of runners in this example taking certain supplements, most of the time it's not at there's no research to show any benefit. Most of the time they're taking something that they're probably getting enough or could easily get enough in their diet themselves, like without resorting to those supplements. But yeah, no, it's an interesting one. I've not come across
Weird.
that I can think of.
I don't know how that would improve my adrenal gland situation. But anyway, so you said less than 10 supplements that you thought were really worth their bang for buck. Uh, when you say supplements, do you mean actual brand names, or do you mean specific vitamins that people should supplement in their diet?
So more supplements that, when taken at the right time, can enhance performance, improve recovery by maybe providing an additional quantity of a particular sort of nutrient, whether that be something like protein powder. It's going to provide the runner with that, obviously, that extra protein. But then equally, there's certain other substances that have been shown to enhance all sorts of different aspects of performance and training when consumed in sort of sufficient quantities.
Nick asked me to ask you specifically about nitrates, and I my understanding, they have something to do with oxygen being better delivered to muscles to help in performance. That's the very basic understanding. Can you maybe speak more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, we can go through some of the sort of supplements I maybe would recommend to athletes.
Sure.
So if we start there with sort of the beetroot juice and nitrates. So like you say, nitrate we tend to get through, or we can get in our diet through sort of your leafy green veg, so kale, spinach, and then additional options could be things like beetroot. And it's the nitrate that's naturally found in the beetroot or in these vegetables that, when consumed in sufficient quantities, it helps to dilate the blood vessels. So you get this increase in blood flow, oxygen delivery to the muscle. So, like you say, you can exercise for longer or higher intensity, and it works in not just endurance sports, but more sports. In terms of your repeated sprint ability, team sports such as rugby, football, netball, hockey, more and more of those types of athletes are also starting to use them. So it's then, because you've got that increased blood flow, the increased blood flow, increased oxygen delivery is helping to sustain that exercise performance for longer. It's also helping to enhance recovery. So if we've got that increase in blood flow, we can remove the waste products too. So it's more, I suppose, muscle physiology. I think a common question I get about that is around like pre-exercise workout. So people often think it's maybe similar to caffeine, but it's more muscle physiology, whereas caffeine is more sort of alertness, response time, and delaying like the perception of fatigue.
Great. So nitrate, what would be something else that you would suggest for enhancing performance in terms of supplements?
Sure. Well, I might just explain a bit more about the nitrates just to sort of
Oh yeah,
answer that, if
definitely.
that's
Expand
okay.
on it as much as you want.
So with the nitrates, it's something that you would take before exercise in the days leading up to maybe a race, for maybe sort of up to sort of four to 6 days beforehand. So, I mean, I should say with some of these supplements, to try and get them in your diet can be quite a challenge. So to get enough nitrate, for example, you're probably going to be having to consume at least 10 whole beets worth of juice at the same time, 2 to 3 hours before exercise. That's without any sort of carbohydrate. It's going to be very difficult to consume. So You can purchase concentrated shots, or you can get sort of concentrated beetroot juice as a carton. So it might be that you take 1 or 2 of those shots each day, or a glass of beetroot juice about 2 or 3 hours before you start your exercise. So that's like really important sort of process time, if you like, so allow your body to digest the nitrate into the nitric oxide, which is going to have the impact there. The second supplement, just as we've mentioned it already, things like protein. So protein, for me, it's not essential. I think that a lot of runners can get it through their diet, or should easily be able to, but it comes back to that point of convenience. In some cases, supplements are maybe going to be the easiest option, or the easiest option for them to have in that situation. So protein powders, the most common ones are sort of whey protein. So you can add a scoop to your shaker with some milk, some water, and it's just providing maybe somewhere between 20 and 30 grams of protein per scoop is, I suppose, the average there. The third one I've sort of mentioned is caffeine. So caffeine is something that you take again before exercise, and it's been shown to delay the onset of fatigue, improve that alertness, response time. So this is something that a runner would be taking around around 60 minutes before the start of their exercise. So that could be in the form of a double espresso. You can obviously get things like caffeine gels, caffeine shots from various supplement companies there too. In terms of, I think, just maybe, I suppose, more of a health one, or health point of view with this, is then vitamin D. So particularly at the moment, winter training, it's dark, so runners are running. The light is obviously getting better, but a lot of runners are still running in the dark, spend all day maybe in their office, or tend to be inside. And then equally at night, same thing. So then going to running club, they've got their lights on, things like that. So a lot of runners, a lot of individuals in general, they're not getting anywhere near enough vitamin D in their diet. So things like vitamin D supplements, again, don't necessarily need to go sort of crazy with this. Most of what you can buy in like the supermarket would be a sort of sufficient quantity. So something like 1,000 international units, or would be a sort of good guide there. I suppose the other one I'd add, particularly for runners, it is then potentially things like omega-3. I mean, again, same thing. We can get omega-3 from the diet, predominantly through our oily fish consumption. So your salmon, mackerel, sardines, that sort of thing. But if there are runners maybe listening or watching this who are not a fan of oily fish, then again, omega-3 supplements can also help just in terms of reducing inflammation, soreness as well. So though, I suppose those are the ones for me. They're my sort of um, they're the ones I'd sort of start off in terms of if we do go down the supplements route. There are others that we could add or go down, but things like bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate supplementation, things like beta alanine supplementation could be some other ones, but they're maybe for the runners are at this more advanced stage. I think for me, if you were to sort of break your nutrition down into sort of 4 levels as such, so you got like the food foundations, which is making sure they are getting sufficient quantities of all these other food groups first. Level 2 is then around sort of lifestyle, so are they meal planning, navigating the supermarket? Level 3 is their nutrition for their sports, in this case running. Are they fueling themselves effectively? Are they using their nutrition to recover? Day to day, are they supporting a strong immune system and things like bone health? And then it's like the supplements. Supplements a lot of the time are really I suppose what are often referred to as like minimal gains, whereas the first 3 levels that I mentioned, they're really the maximal gains. Nailing those 3 levels are what's going to give the runner the biggest improvement, shall we say?
That makes sense. I think a lot of runners, when they first start out, they want, to go really hard with training. They want to really nail nutrition, and they probably start on that level 4 above the level 3. And it's the same with running. You really need to start with the basics, nail the basics, and then let's start talking about things like heat training, or things that are more, let's nail the basics first before we start going really top-notch things that like heat training, if you don't have those basic foundation, it's not really going to help you very much. And it's, I think, similar to nutrition. Nail those first 3 levels before you start thinking about supplementation. But I think we get excited as a culture. We do in America anyway, where we want to go straight to level 4 and start supplementing everything.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I've probably seen quite a lot of people, and I've had quite a lot of people reach out to me, and it's exactly that. It's going, what do you think, or what supplement should I be taking? It's like, hold on a sec. Have you got, how many portions of vegetables are you getting in your diet? And they're like, oh, 2. And it's like, well, hold on a sec. If we've got all this money, if you like, that you're potentially going to spend on supplements that you could argue, as I say, are not going to give you sort of minimal gains, why don't we invest that money in nailing your nutrition foundations to begin with? That's where they're going to see such a bigger improvement. And yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, in the same way you guys are working on your technique, or sorry, working on the technique, getting the foundations in play in terms of the training, it's almost like you could put the 2 together. They sort of marry up side by side as well.
For sure. So I guess condensed list, because you went through those supplements and then you explained them a lot, which we appreciate. But forgive me if I forget, this is a memory test for me. So we went nitrates, caffeine, protein, perhaps in the form of protein powder, vitamin D. Don't tell me where I already said caffeine. Omega-3s.
Yeah.
Was that it? I think that was it.
Yeah. I mean, the other one that I suppose is, so I'm just going to, no, sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze. No. And I think the other supplement to add to this isn't just about carbohydrate. So carbohydrate supplements, and what I'm referring to there is your gels, your chews, your sort of sports drinks, things like that. 100%, they are going to help. There is an argument to say that they do become quite expensive, but then at the same time, it's also that convenience. They're formatted in a way to help the individual get, in this case, sufficient amounts of carbohydrate into their body, but in an easy to digest manner. It comes back to this point of like food first, but almost food, not just food. Sorry, I'll do that again. It comes back to this point of what we often refer to as food first, not food only, though. So it's a case of, there are times where the gels, the chews, they're actually more convenient. I mean, if we take, on average, most gels in the UK have about 23 grams of carbs in. Some will have more, some will have a little bit less. But to get that amount of carbohydrate from a food first approach, for example, that's about 100, and the individual would have to have about 120, 130 grams of like new potatoes or sort of baby potatoes. Trying to consume that during a run, it's extremely difficult to do. It's the same thing with what I said with the beetroot juice. Trying to get sufficient quantities of nitrate in your diet, you'd have to be eating 4 or 5 bags of spinach, kale, things like that. Whereas having it in like these supplement forms, it just becomes a lot more convenient. And the other bit I'd add to that, probably because it's quite a common or prevalent topic at the moment, it's just around electrolytes. Do we need electrolytes? Yes, but probably not all the time. Again, at the moment, I'm seeing loads of people commenting, loads of posts around this. I think for me, they're a bit overhyped to an extent for what they actually do or how they can actually help. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're not training, water throughout the day will be absolutely fine. If you are then going to train, particularly if you're going to start doing like a high intensity workout, longer runs, certainly worth chucking a sort of electrolyte tablet into your water bottle, particularly if it's runs, let's say, under an hour. If you're then running for sort of an hour and beyond, this is where we might then go down the route of not necessarily just electrolytes and water, but then starting to incorporate the carbohydrate there as well. So generally speaking, most runners will be absolutely fine with sort of 1 tablet or a sachet. It's usually about 500 milliliters of fluid. Some runners that are maybe a little bit more of a sort of salty sweater, have a higher sweat rate, they might need to look at some of those with a sort of higher dose of some of those electrolytes. So things like sodium, for example, there will be a bit of variation between brands as well. But for me, they're the supplements I tend to focus on.
That makes sense. So would you say for an athlete who was unsure about how much electrolyte to take in addition to whatever their diet is providing, should they look for and recognize within themselves signs, specific signs that signal perhaps they are getting close to being deficient in electrolytes during a session? And what would those signs look like? I'm thinking brain fog, muscle cramps, things like that. And off of that question as well, if they start to feel those signs, is it already too late to try and reverse it? Or is that just your body giving you a signal and you still have time to correct it?
Yeah, no, 100%. Is it too late? No, not necessarily. I mean, in terms of like cramps, for example, I mean, there's all sorts of factors that could be at play here. I mean, from a nutrition point of view, like say, it could very much be that they're sort of they are dehydrated. So it could be that their electrolyte levels have maybe sort of plummeted. Quite often, I'd probably say that from experience. I'd probably say that it's not so much that the runners have sort of it's the lack of electrolytes that's causing the cramps. I'd probably say in general, it's probably the fact that the runner's not drinking enough in the first place. So in terms of being able to monitor your hydration status, a really sort of simple starting point is things like urine color. So when the runner goes to the toilet, and everyone can sort of Google this, like urine color charts. If your urine color looks this sort of pale yellow, sort of pale clear color, that's a fairly good indicator that they are hydrated. Where if it's looking sort of really dark yellow, orange, brown, that sort of color, that's a very big indicator that they probably are very dehydrated. So in that case, it's not to say they've got to start drinking liters and liters of water straight away, but certainly starting to try and incorporate a bit more fluid at regular intervals over those next few hours is just going to sort of bring that hydration level up there. Second thing that I think can make a big difference is then starting to maybe monitor how much fluid the individual's losing during their training runs. So this work, just for ease of maths, it works out quite well. If they're running or training for at least an hour, if they were to weigh themselves pre-exercise in minimal clothing, weigh themselves again after exercise, again minimal clothing, if they've lost again, based on experience I've seen in an hour session, I've seen some runners lose anything from half a kilo to maybe even a kilo and a half in some cases. So real huge amounts of volume that they're losing there. So all of a sudden, if they're in the same way, if they're under fueling, if they're underhydrating themselves, this is probably having a big impact. So if they find that they are finishing the run or finishing their training and they're anything more than half a kilo lighter, for me, it's more that would be quite a good indicator that they probably are very dehydrated and they do need to replace that fluid that they've then lost. The third thing for me is then things like on their clothing, particularly if they're wearing sort of dark clothing. Some runners often get like maybe the white patches. So particularly maybe once they've sort of cooled down, maybe on their skin. Sometimes you might find that across the top of their forehead, sorry, down the side of their face, they've got like white marks. Or if they sort of rub their forehead, they get all these sort of crusty sort of bits come off. Again, that would be a fairly good indicator. And then the other common indicator is that sort of salty taste in that mouth. So if they find that they're getting that quite often, that'd be a fairly good indicator that they're probably losing quite a lot of fluid, which is then really important that they are then replacing as well.
Good. Those are some things that you can definitely do mid-run, just to be aware of, the taste in the mouth, being aware of the white patches for sure. Going back to vitamin D, I had a question about if you were to think about vitamin D absorption the most optimal way, does the level of fat in the milk that you drink, is that going to help or hinder that vitamin D absorption? Do you think skim milk, 2%, 1% versus full fat milk? What do you typically recommend for your athletes and as far as fat content? Because fat does play a role in vitamin D absorption in the body.
Yeah, 100%. It's a good question. I think for me, I'd have to look through the rest of their diet. What else are they having? Where are they getting other sources of fat within their diet. I mean, in terms of like milk choice, for me, generally speaking, I tend to start with something like semi-skim milk. It's just a nice blend of everything. So, as I said before, the calcium hit, the protein hit, the carbohydrate. If runners are maybe trying to drop or lose a little bit of body fat, for example, maybe bringing that down to skim milk, so there's not a huge too much of a difference, or sorry, the protein content, calcium content, generally speaking, is fairly similar, but then switching from, say, whole milk to semi-skim, semi-skim to skimmed, it's a good way to just bring that fat content down a little bit, so a little bit less calories there. I think the other part as well that often makes a huge difference is then the situation that they're then using it. How much are they actually having in the first place? So for some runners that might have a splash of milk in a cup of tea, coffee, go into these like really low doses, like say the sort of 1%, things like that. Is that going to make a huge difference? Probably not. And I often find that a lot of people, they make these sort of, almost you could argue, like these big drastic changes to their diet, but for me, I think you've got to be able to enjoy your food and enjoy your drink at the same time. So for me, as I say, I'd be going somewhere around the sort of semi-skimmed, maybe skimmed milk choices there, just again, if the runner's trying to manage their calories, manage their fat intake there as well.
Great. I need to research it more, but I'm pretty sure that I'm deficient in vitamin D right now due to winter and everything. And I definitely do not need another stress fracture in my life. So I've been trying to figure out whether to optimize with switching to full fat milk, just because, scientifically, if you could just explain that a little bit more, it's a fat soluble vitamin, right? Vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you are drinking anything other than full fat milk, that means that usually engineers are adding vitamin D back into the milk product because removal of the fat thus removes vitamin D from milk, correct? Do you think that adding back in process that you see in maybe skim milk, 2%, 1%, that kind of artificial adding that vitamin D back in is as good as what you would see in the full fat milk to begin with?
Um, Yeah, it's a good question. For me, I think when you actually look at the quantity of vitamin D that you're going to get through some of, like, again, the food and drink choices, it's still not going to be sufficient in the first place, particularly through the winter. So for me, in this case, and not just for runners, but for everyone, I'd still be going down the route of like a sort of vitamin D supplement just to get sufficient quantities. Sufficient quantities. Um, in terms of sort of going back to the conversation about vitamin D fortification being added, yes, some products will have some additional vitamin D in them, but again, I'd have to look at some of the brands just to sort of check the quantity. But even still, yeah, it's a really good question. Even still, for me, I'd still be going down the route of like the supplement just to get enough quantity. I mean, when we start looking at fortified cereals, for example, or some of these other fortified milks, like you say, you'd probably having to be drinking or eating so much just to get a sufficient amount of vitamin D in this example. But obviously with that comes huge amounts of maybe calories, huge amounts of fat, sugar, as well. So in that case, I'd be going down the sort of supplement route, just because, yeah, it's going to be much easier, much more convenient for the runner or the individual to get enough of that nutrient, or that um, get enough of that sort of that vitamin into their diet or into their body without having to go sort of crazy with the diet.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, this might be my last question because I don't want to tie up any more of your time. But in terms of oils that people cook with, perhaps they make salad dressings with, etc. And let's say olive oil, canola oil, sesame oil, peanut oil. There's so many, obviously, coconut oil. In terms of what what would you suggest for an athlete to try and cook with the most? Or would you say that there are different positives and negatives to each oil?
Yeah, I think for me, in terms of like the added fat, so oils, butters, spreads, things like that. For me, I suppose my starting point is actually getting the runner to maybe think about one, the quantity that they're using. So I often find that a lot of runners or a lot of athletes, they'll follow what some of the chefs do on TV, where they go, I add so much oil to the frying pan saucepan, but it just means like if we use the example of some chicken that they're then frying, um, it's just sitting in this pool of oil. So all of a sudden, with that, yes, we do need some of these fats in our diet, but then equally, it's a huge amount of calories. So we've got, in terms of fat per gram, we've got about 9 calories there. So if the runner is then having huge amounts of oil in their diet through sort of deep frying a lot of their foods, potentially those additional calories that's coming from the oil, it's maybe what's stopping them from achieving their goals. So my approach here, my process here is if they are going to go down the route of using oils and bits like that, a good guideline is 1 teaspoon of oil per person per meal. Depending on what they're doing, could they use maybe alternatives? So if they're going to soften some onions, some vegetables, could they use a few drops of water, for example, so they don't add loads of calories there? The other thing I then add, just to help with sort of managing how much they're having, is then looking at alternative cooking methods. So rather than frying or deep frying something, could they maybe poach it, grill it, bake it, use something like an air fryer? So it's just managing that sort of fat intake there. For me, I mean, don't get me wrong, we do still need some fats in our diet, but I'd be trying to focus more on getting the unsaturated fat sources that would then come from the oily fish, your avocados, your unsalted nuts, seeds, things like that. In terms of cooking oils, olive oil is a good sort of all-round option, in my opinion. Some oils will have a different, what is often referred to as like smoke point.
Yeah, olive
So
oil has a low smoke point, so it's kind of hard to when you're cooking with it. If it gets too hot, it denatures. It does something weird.
yeah, and it's sort of, I mean, there is more research coming out now about sort of the impact of some of these oils, um, and what sort of impact they might be having. So it sort of almost like justifies, like I say, for me, I try and avoid going crazy with some of these oils, and then I'm using, I'm maybe using some of these alternative cooking methods as well, or instead.
Well, I'm from the South, and here in the South, we do what Paula Deen does and puts a stick of butter in everything. I'm just kidding. We don't all do that. But that's great information. I have one more controversial question, and it's probably old hat by now because it's been 4 years, 5 years. Do you remember the Shelby Houlihan case with Olympic runner, had some pork, got tested, and she tested positive for nandrolone? Do you remember that?
I do, and I do. I'm starting to remember it now, and I think there's actually been a few other cases as well with athletes. As I'd have to double check. I'd have to double check my facts. I might be wrong, but I'm sure there have been other cases of this.
Is that possible from your viewpoint to get enough nandrolone, whatever that may be, from a burrito to be able to test positive?
Um, Depending on where it's come from, what's been involved, I think anything's possible. I mean, like I say, you go. I mean, in the UK, you can go on to like the anti-doping website, and you can read all these case studies of athletes that have tested positive for a banned substance, and often it's the reasons they put it down to is through their sort of food and drink that they've then had unintentionally. So whether it's come from food, I have seen it before, where it's then been attributed to certain like you say, I'd have to double check the facts on this, but I'm pretty sure, like you say, it was then attributed to the sort of meat that they were having in this example. I've seen athletes that have then been tested positive because they've taken supplements without that have a product in that they're not aware contains a banned substance. Yeah, I mean, 100% depending on how that food has been treated, what else has been added to it, maybe in the sort of farming process, growing process. It's a really interesting area. Like if farmers or whoever it is then are then using some of these other like banned substances that might help the sort of what is a banned substance to an athlete, maybe helping them get a better price for their products, their animals in this case, it it becomes potentially quite challenging or quite difficult to sort of navigate. But yeah, no, potentially you could find that there are banned substances that are coming through sort of food. I'd have to do a little bit more research in terms of other cases where this has maybe come up. But I do, yeah, I do remember the case that you mentioned. Yeah, I'd have to go away and do some research on it.
That's fine. It was just, I guess it made such an impact because that was one of the, I guess because she's affiliated with Nike, of course, she got a lot of press from that. But yeah, I appreciate your contribution in all these different areas. I think it's been really helpful and informative. And if anything, everyone's afraid now to eat at a food truck because they're going to be eating a banned substance. But no, I think it's great information, and I appreciate that you gave all of us some usable, very immediate usable takeaways about what supplements to use and different ways to prepare food, and also how to structure our meals through the day to optimize the activities we want to pursue. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Yeah, I think this is the thing I find is like every runner is so different in terms of not just what they want, what they like, but it's also taking into account, as we've sort of said, the demands of their day. What does that look like in terms of location, food likes, dislikes, other people, other factors, as we've said, sort of being on the go, training early, training maybe late at night, other commitments. It becomes a real challenge for a lot of runners to navigate. So yeah, no, hope that's been useful.
Definitely. And one more thing, if I was to go on to Fuel the Runner, the platform that you have, since everyone has such an individualized schedule and different demands, what does that process look for somebody who's interested in getting started with that?
Yeah, sure. So Fuel the Runner, there's a few sort of stages to it. So there's the first stage is like I call it the Run Ready Nutrition Toolbox, which is like a sort of one-to-one call with myself. We go through, we plan the runner's nutrition strategy, or maybe go through any challenges that they're facing. Maybe if they haven't got a race coming up, but they're just a bit stuck, they're struggling with sort of tiredness, fatigue, illness, for example. And then I've got loads of resources that I then send to the runner separately. In terms of Fuel the Runner sort of community, so this is an online community full of lots of runners, and it's basically a chance to be part of a group of like-minded runners that are looking to enhance their performance, achieve their goals by nailing their nutrition. So when they join the platform, they get access to a variety of different resources, recipes. We do sort of live webinars covering a variety of different sort of nutrition topics, running topics. Over the course of this year, we'll be doing webinars with other guests that are not just nutrition, but for bringing into account things like psychology and bringing into account sort of things like physio support. Um, so basically trying to cover all aspects of sort of running performance there. Um, there's our online course, so it's over 25 modules full of lots of different nutrition topics. So again, everything around how to fuel before, excuse me, how to fuel. It includes everything in this course about how to fuel before a run, during a run, afterwards. But then equally things like competition considerations, things like navigating the supermarket, how nutrition can support or help the runner maintain their overall health as well. And then the third part is more of the sort of one-to-one coaching. So for those runners that are looking to take their running to the next level. This is a much more in-depth support package, so it's a bit more personalised to the runner themselves. So we'll have a lot more contact time with me, and then we can go through and sort of nail all their different aspects of their nutrition for whatever they've got coming up, maybe this year or over the next sort of few months or so.
Great. So online at fueltherunner.com.
So online mainly it's part of my website. So Fueled by Fleming, and then Fuel the Runner. So there's a page on there with blogs, additional resources to get the runner started, and then we're also quite active on Instagram. So just at Fuel the Runner. So Fuel the Runner Instagram page, and then same thing, the Fuel the Runner Facebook page or Facebook group if that person's not on Instagram, or sort of vice versa. So they're the main channels or main areas that Fuel the Runner's on.
Well, great. Thank you. And we hope to see you again.
No worries. Take care.